So, hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels podcast. It's been a pretty momentous week already in politics and international and EU politics, and I'm delighted to be joined by two of my colleagues to dig into it. This week we're joined by Bence Szabo.
Hello, everyone.
And we're also joined by Agnieszka Kołek.
Thank you for inviting me.
No, we're delighted to have you both. Today we're going to be tackling the election results in Austria. We're going to be looking at the recent escalations in the Middle East and Israel, Iran and Lebanon. And we're also going to be giving you a little report from the book launch that they tried to cancel. So let's kick off with the election results in Austria. In some respects, is this turning into a kind of familiar story? We've got a big result for a populist party in an election driven by mass dissatisfaction with the economic situation, with the geopolitical situation, and especially with immigration. And yet there's a real struggle to translate that kind of election result into actually a government. So it seems that already the cordon sanitaire is kind of working its way through, and Austrian politics doesn't look like it will actually be changed that much by this historic win. Benny, what have you made of the election result in Austria?
I think what it clearly shows is that patience will be a clear merit for patriotic and right-wing parties in the years to come. Because for FPÖ essentially to create a coalition with ÖVP with the chance of Kickl being a chancellor is almost minuscule. So in this case, for them, being patient and being in the opposition force is going to be helpful. If you take the Swedish example, the Sweden Democrats themselves played for the long game, and even though they are one of the strongest parties, they are still not the leading force, because the societal tendencies of cordon sanitaire and the political establishment's clear will to maintain the cordon sanitaire just stop these parties to be in the forefront. Wilders also did the same, and I think in the case of FPÖ, their best course of action in the months and years to come is still to be in this renegade position, because that stands well for them. And the past also supports my point of view in this sense, because before 2000, they were in the same position. They gave the chancellor position to the People's Party, and their support collapsed essentially. They couldn't position themselves well. So if they stay patient, wait for the long game, I think they are good to go.
So your advice to the People's Party, the FPÖ, the populists in Austria, your advice would be they've got to stick to their principles.
Yes.
They can't kind of get drawn into some kind of weak or at least watered down, diluted kind of populist politics that would involve if there was a coalition between them and the kind of centre-right party. You say, even though it's frustrating that they're being kept out of power by the cordon sanitaire, they've got to stick to their principles.
Exactly. That's because many of the voters from the centre-right People's Party just decided to go to the Freedom Party in the first place, because they managed to be edgy, managed to stand up for their principles and not compromise. Whereas where we see on a European scale, many of the centre-right parties are more interested in maintaining the status quo, right, rather than setting a new course of action.
Yeah, let's come back to and dig into a little bit the kind of voters and what their concerns were. But Agnieszka, I wanted to get your opinion already on the cordon sanitaire, on the way that what we've got is increasingly the establishment of, when we have a kind of victorious party, a populist party that does particularly well, it seems that the kind of default response now that's being kind of rolled out right across the continent is that every other party will kind of come together to do their bit to try and stop the populist party from having any impact in government. How have you assessed the kind of fallout of the election?
I think that it's not going to work in the long term. And I agree with Bence that the parties need to be patient, and we see it paying off also within the European Union politics with the recent two members of parliament joining the Patriot group, the Konfederacja group, Anna Bryłka, and her colleague. I think it's a great move for them to, at the beginning, just stay unaffiliated, not adjusted, and just wait with the negotiations behind the scenes to get a better deal, and actually now join the strongest group within the European Parliament when it comes to the right-wing parties. I think what we will also observe is the voters, the public, being more observant of what's happening, because in a sense all of these moves from the so-called center-right parties, which the reason I'm saying so-called is because they claim to be center-right, but actually with the policies they push, they actually more towards the left than the center-right. The public will see the actions for what they are, that actually they censorious, actually a lot of the policies are destroying the industries, and it's also catastrophic when it comes to the illegal migration and its effects when it comes to security in Europe.
Yeah, and I mean, is this the kind of thing that we see time and time again, that in many cases it's the centre-right parties, the old traditional parties that kind of lost any real roots in representing ordinary people's concern? It's they that in many cases act as kind of the biggest blocker on political change. We know, I mean, people who are broadly conservative, like some of us, well, of course we can make our criticisms of the left, but don't we actually need to kind of redouble our focus on those traditional parties of the centre-right?
I agree. I think especially when it comes when the election comes up, they are very happy to use different phrases and proposals of policies where they seem to be really moderate and actually coming out to meet the voters. So that was the case with the farmers. When they said we're negotiating with the farmers, there would be changes to the green transition, Green Deal. But then post-election, we see that there's a complete different activity and policy still being pushed because they actually went into coalition to continue the same policies.
Yeah, okay. And Benny, we said we'd dig a little bit into voter concerns. What's your take on what's driving the dynamic in Austria? We know things are common across the continent. We know we got the problems with migration, with the economic situation. But I mean, I saw some polling or some exit polling suggesting that actually the result was slightly different in Austria for at least one reason, which was that when you looked at both young men and young women, who in lots of other countries are kind of really drifting apart politically, in Austria they seem to be kind of more joined up, and lots of them are all voting for the Freedom Party. What's your take on what's driving the dynamics in Austria?
Altogether, I would just say that for young people, essentially, finding the identity of the nation, finding safety in the country, finding stable housing costs in general was something that was really driving the youth. And also, it's not just Austria alone. Youth voters across Europe somehow just feel that the status quo that was reigning in European politics in the last 10 to 15 years, and Austria is no exception, is really status quo oriented. And it's almost rebellious to say that the FPÖ, the Renegade Party, is something that is cool now to vote for. And also as a member of the youth vote, I would say, or like a representative of the youth vote, simply just saying no to the past in some shape or form and trying out something new is something that is also very strongly resonating in some of my Austrian acquaintances as well, because they just want to try out something new, something daring.
And yeah, Agnieszka, what have you made of this? I mean, I mentioned that bit of polling about maybe men and women are not so far apart as it's sometimes kind of presented as. What have you taken?
So I think it's a complex picture, so it's not straightforward, but I see two elements. So we have this ongoing war in the mainstream media for years, and also cultural elites where men and women are pitted against each other. But I also see an element of, I would call it disinformation, because we don't get a true picture of violence against women across Europe. You would see various think tanks around the world and in Europe when they deal with extremism and terror attacks. You would get the data, you would get analysis and looking at elements of the picture, kind of a zooming in. But when it comes to the violence against women and what started to appear on a regular basis across especially Western Europe, like France, Germany, Sweden, this you have to really dig deep to get the information, first of all, but then to find analysis, you really struggle to get scientific analysis of all of this data. So I think that could be a game changer if we started to openly discuss it and try to analyze it in a clear light.
Yeah, I think that's something important. And as these things come to the surface, I think we will see a change in voting patterns. Now, moving on, I mean, in the last few days, events have moved very, very quickly. We've had Israel's the ground invasion of parts of Lebanon, and then last night, I mean, we're recording this on a Wednesday. Last night, Iran unleashed a massive barrage of cruise missiles and other kinds of missiles onto Israeli territory. This obviously marks a major escalation in the conflict that was unleashed after the horrible pogrom of October 7th last year, the anniversary of which we're fast approaching. Things have moved really quickly in the Middle East, but it still seems to be the driving dynamic still seems to be the attempt for Israel to establish some measure of security in its broader region. So, Agnieszka, this is something that you follow pretty closely. What have you taken of the last few days?
I think it was an inevitable move from Israel. We have to be aware that many villages and towns were evacuated in the north, and since October the 8th, there's been rockets being fired from Lebanon towards Israel. So this is not something that we could not foresee happening. And one of the aims of this war has been to dismantle the threat in the south and in the north. So obviously, in the south, it's more or less under control. Obviously, we still have hostages being held, and we all hope that most of them are still alive. So now it was the time to look towards the north and really take it seriously, and there were preparations already underway. And with the missile attack yesterday, Iran promised to respond. Obviously, we see that they quite desperate because it was more than 180 missiles, long range, mid range, and short range. Fortunately, all of the defenses worked. Iron Dome and Arrow and David Sling. So thanks to this technology and also support from the British forces based in Cyprus, they were able to respond and to stop these attacks causing more harm. And now, obviously, after this attack, we will wait for Israel's response. Obviously, there would be response. Now the question is, would they target the nuclear facilities that are preparing the nuclear weapons, or would it be more the infrastructure related to oil and energy?
Yeah, Benny, what have you made for this? I know many of us have got friends in Israel or acquaintances in Israel. It must be a particularly scary time over there. But what have you taken from kind of the reaction internationally?
Internationally, that's also very crucial or interesting timing-wise why all these things are happening, because the US elections are coming up, and obviously US foreign policy is an integral part of the election campaign. So you have Trump focusing more on domestic affairs, you have Kamala who is more foreign policy focused, but Trump also with his NATO approach, he really tried to shake things up, or really is trying to shake things up. With the current conflict at hand, what we have as a problem is first and foremost, the US currently, and as far as I know, their navy is not stationed in the Mediterranean, so them being a guardsman in this conflict is not in the picture as of now. And as we're speaking, probably they are already mobilized. But Europe also must play a more significant role in this case, because just as we saw with the European elections, and just in general, we see that Europe has to figure out how it handles conflicts with the Middle East and also North Africa. And if they want to secure their external borders and want to be a clear actor in foreign affairs, they must be more vigilant or more knowledgeable and also more active in the foreign scene. With my friends, essentially, everyone is afraid, everyone is unsure, and the last thing we need is unsurety and no assurance in these cases, because that will be just the root of more problem and more conflict emerging.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of people digging into precisely what this means in terms of Israel and what Iran's trying to do and all the rest of it, and I'm sure we can point people to good resources on that matter. But for us here in Europe, isn't that point that Benny raised really important, Agnieszka, that we're moving into a very different kind of international world? And it seems to me that although our leaders in Europe talk a lot about the kind of a new geopolitical Europe or whatever, but that they don't really have any sense of what's going on and how different the world that we live in now is to one that maybe some of us have got used to in the past period.
To be honest with you, I don't think it's just that they don't know. I think it's not lack of knowledge or understanding of only the situation on the ground in the Middle East. I think they have a very difficult case what to do, knowing that parts of the population in Europe are hostile to the host countries, and also they would be hostile to any assertiveness when it comes to the foreign policy in the Middle East. And some of these approaches that they might want to decide to take, sometimes they would be in contradiction to each other, because obviously Middle East politically is quite complex. So you might have a friend in an enemy of your enemy, but they're not necessarily your true friend. So I think they're trying to work it out, and it's not necessarily too successful. They are aware of Iranian proxy terror groups stationed in Europe, in various countries, and I think they're trying to work on the spot, trying to make decisions. So I think this is also an issue.
Yeah, for sure. Benny, you can maybe reply on this. I know that, for lots of young people, they've grown up in a world maybe where conflict didn't seem familiar to them. But, isn't another issue coming out of these intensifying conflicts along the kind of the crisis lines of geopolitics, if you like, that, people are already forecasting another wave of migration from the Middle East. And is this something that we as Europe need to have a response to?
Honestly, just based on my last year's experiences here in Brussels, the biggest issue I see with youth engagement in terms of reactions towards the Middle East crisis is that the initial reaction of people is just to react emotionally to a very complex challenge ahead. And many people resort to activist activities in the first place. And the last thing we need in Europe is just rash decisions. And just for the youth themselves to just make sure that they study the history of terrorism in the Middle East, they study the history of Israel, it would be crucial. So for us just to have civil dialogue with the youth and not mobilizing the pent-up energy of the youth for activist purposes, that would be a significant help. Just in case of Brussels in general, what you see in the universities is the people are in encampments. You see campuses being overrun by activists. That is in no shape or form solution to these problems.
Okay, and then finally for this week, I wanted to dig in a little bit to an event that we held earlier in the week, which was a book launch for our executive director, Frank Furedi's book, The War Against the Past, which I urge all of our viewers, if they haven't already, to go out and get a copy of. It's a really interesting, excellent book. They can also check out the deep dive that we filmed on the topic, which is on our YouTube channel. But this should have been, in many ways, a routine event for us. Like, our exec director's got a book, we do a book launch, and I'm sure our viewers are very familiar now with kind of what happened around the attempted cancellation. We had one bookstore who refused to go ahead with the event and then came up with all kinds of different excuses that seemed to change by the day as to why it was that he wasn't prepared to host the book launch. And actually the event, it went ahead and it was for us a normal event, but Agnieszka, what did you take from the whole kind of scandal surrounding it, and also just from the event itself, from the insights that Frank raises in the book?
So from the scandal itself, when our director, Professor Frank Furedi, read the contents of the email, my first reaction was that actually they're revealing for who they are really, meaning not just the bookshop by itself, but in a sense the whole milieu claiming to be democratic, trying to uphold the democracy, talking about European values, that actually through this action, the email, the contents of the email, they actually showing that they are not for democracy, not for the discussion, they are afraid of ideas, they're not able to even just engage in criticism of a book. So actually, I thought it's really good because they're showing exactly who they are and what they stand for through their actions, not just words, as I was mentioning earlier when it comes to center-right politics in Europe that seem to try to hold on to power. And then the event, it was well attended. Actually, we were running out of spaces and I had to give up my seat. So I think
selfless as ever, yes.
Trying my best. So it was a great success, and the public was mixed. It wasn't only, let's say, fans of Professor Furedi's work, and obviously there are many fans of his work because he's a prolific writer and thinker. but also there were difficult questions, and Professor Furedi answered them all, and there was a great atmosphere. And to me, what was great about that, it actually felt like a celebration of freedom and celebration of freedom of expression, because I think this is something that we need to underline, that when we allow ourselves to meet, to talk, and not always agree on everything, there is a new synergy between people, and this is what we're trying to actually promote here and uphold. So it's not some kind of a scary movement, but actually celebration of the strengths of our society.
For myself, I would say it was a very fun déjà vu experience, because it really felt like NetCon 2.0. So
it wasn't nearly as intense
of course
as that.
not. That warfare alone was a different experience on its own. But I think what is very crucial in this case is that I've been here for almost a year now, or a bit more than a year now, and I've engaged in a lot of conversations about MCC Brussels' right to be here in the Brussels bubble, because our mission in the first place is to be very anti-bubbly, or bubbly. It depends on how you want to put it. Apologies for the bad English audience. But in the first and foremost sense, MCC Brussels is here to shake things up. And with these experiences, what we truly managed to achieve is that it not only justifies our position, but I think even if I wouldn't necessarily support our opponents' ideas, I would think that what we are really advocating for in the sense of debate, that also helps our opponents to refine their opinions as well. And with this cancellation, I think the event that we had, and even during the event, there were some very strong questions directed to Professor Frank Furedi. And I think those questions strengthened his position as well. And with this event in itself, we achieved a very lively debate environment. So I do not wish for more cancellations, God no, but if we can create events like this based on such unfortunate experiences, I think if more cancellations are to come, the better the situation will be for us. But let's hope it will not come down to that.
Yeah, well, I think that point is really, really important about the fact that it's both for us and for our ideological opponents. It's through the debate and discussion that we kind of sharpen our ideas. And we know that actually the atmosphere in Brussels is kind of quite dead and stilted, stifling, that even many of the people that we might disagree with, they're not all that sharp. They're so used to just repeating the same banal talking points over and over again to their friends. And they're not, there's a sense that everybody in this city has kind of grown very comfortable with the received opinions that they currently hold. So I do think you're right. We're here to shake things up. I'm sure that's something we'll all be doing. But yeah, Agnieszka, what do we need to do to kind of shake up discussion in the city a bit?
I think we should hold more events that could be based around also newly published books, because I think there's quite a lot of new books being published that touch upon very complex, difficult issues, and the issues especially central to our future. So coming from the situation where we are now, but looking into the future, and I'm especially interested in artificial intelligence, and I think we should have more conversations about that, and in relation to politics, but also in relation to the future of our society, because that could really shake things up massively. And if we kind of continue in this direction with this complacent elite's approach to any subject, this is really dangerous situation for us.
Yeah, I think we have to say we're here to be kind of anti-complacent. We're here to try and really shake things up and force people to think about things differently. So if you have enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. And also check out our latest events. We've got another great event coming up, particularly we've got a big conference to celebrate the launch of Frank's new book, but it's not just going to be about the book. It's going to be really grappling with these issues related to history, between the battle of history, say in East versus West in Europe, and a whole range of other issues related to the war against the past. So hope to see you at that conference. But we've got a great program of events also coming up. But for now, that's all from us. Thanks so much, Agnieszka and Benny.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.